It was Australia Day, January 26, 1966, a hot day, the kind that pushes you toward the water. Glenelg Beach, near Adelaide, was full of people. Families were out, kids were yelling and splashing in the shallows. The sun was bright. It was a normal summer holiday, and in the middle of all that noise, all that life, 3 children vanished. Jane, who was 9, Arnna, who was 7, and Grant, who was only 4. The Beaumont children. They took a 5-minute bus ride from their home to the beach, a trip they'd made before. They were sensible kids. Jane was responsible, always looking after her younger siblings. Their parents, Nancy and Jim, trusted them. It was a different time, a time when kids had freedom. When a short trip to a familiar beach felt safe, they left home around 10 in the morning. They were supposed to be back on the 12 o'clock bus. When it arrived without them, their mother started to worry. By 2 o'clock, she was still waiting. She thought maybe they'd missed the bus or decided to walk. So she took the next bus to the beach herself. But they weren't there. The beach was still crowded, but her children were gone. Jim came home from work. The panic set in. They called the police, and so began Australia's most enduring mystery. A case that changed the country forever. The question isn't just what happened to them. The question that haunts everyone is how. How could 3 children be taken from a crowded beach in broad daylight with hundreds of potential witnesses around? Why did no one see a thing? Why did no one raise the alarm? The answer is chillingly simple. It happened in plain sight because the person who took them didn't look like a threat. He didn't use force. He didn't drag them away screaming. He used trust. He used charm. He made it look normal. The crowd wasn't a risk to him. The crowd was his cover. To understand how this could happen, you have to understand the world of 1966. It was a more innocent time, or at least people believed it was. Strangers talked to each other. Kids roamed their neighborhoods freely. The idea of a predator methodically grooming children wasn't part of the public consciousness. A friendly man playing with kids on the beach would have been seen as just that. A friendly man. Nobody would have thought twice. The abductor exploited this innocence. It was his greatest weapon. The police investigation pieced together a fragmented timeline of the children's last hours. They had been seen by several people, and those sightings built a disturbing picture. A local postman, who knew the children, saw them walking toward the beach around 10:15 a.m. They seemed happy, excited, nothing was wrong. Later, they were seen playing under the sprinklers near the beach kiosk. Witnesses said a man was with them. A tall, thin-faced man with blondish brown hair. He was in his mid-30s, he was fit, with a suntan, he was watching them play. At one point, he played with them. He was friendly, he seemed to know them. Little Grant even ran up and playfully wrestled with him. Jane, the protective older sister, didn't seem concerned. This wasn't a stranger accosting them. This looked like a friend, an uncle, a family acquaintance. Then came the most telling clue. Jane went into a local cake shop. She used a £1 note to buy a meat pie and some pastry. This was strange for 2 reasons. First, her mother had only given her enough money for the bus fare, and maybe a treat. She didn't have a £1 note. Second, they'd already eaten, they weren't hungry. The shop owner remembered Jane seemed to be looking for someone outside. It was like she was buying the food for somebody else. The man. It suggests he had given her the money. He was buying them gifts. He was earning their trust. This wasn't an impulse crime. This was planned. The man may have met them before. Some theories suggest he'd seen them on previous trips to the beach. He might have learned their names, built a rapport over time. On Australia Day, he was cashing in on that groundwork. He wasn't a monster who appeared out of nowhere. He was the friendly man from the beach. When he suggested they go somewhere, they likely went willingly. Why wouldn't they? He'd been nice to them. He'd bought them food. He was their friend. An elderly woman later came forward. She said she'd been sitting on a bench and saw the 3 children walking away from the beach. They were with the same tall blonde man. They weren't crying. They weren't being forced. They were laughing. She said they looked happy. They were holding his hand. They were walking away from the bus stop in the direction of a nearby car park. They were heading away from home, and then they were gone. No one saw them get into a car. No one saw anything else. They just walked out of the frame. The search was massive. The entire state of South Australia, and soon the whole country, was mobilized. Police, volunteers, army soldiers scoured the beaches, the sand dunes, the nearby suburbs. Drains were searched. Abandoned buildings were checked. Every lead was followed. The public was desperate to help. The story was on the front page of every newspaper. The faces of Jane, Arnna, and Grant were everywhere, but there was nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no ransom note. It was as if they had been erased from the face of the earth. The silence was deafening. It was this complete lack of evidence that made the case so terrifying. There was no closure, just a void. The man, the tall, blonde man, was the only real lead. A police artist drew a sketch based on the witness descriptions. The sketch became one of the most famous images in Australian criminal history. But who was he? Thousands of men were interviewed. None of them could be definitively placed at the beach with the children. The pressure on the police was immense, and their desperation, they even brought in a psychic from the Netherlands, Gerard Croiset. He was a celebrity psychic at the time. He claimed the children were buried under a newly constructed warehouse not far from the Beaumonts' home. The public seized on this. It was a tangible hope, a place to dig. Money was raised. The media descended. The owners of the warehouse eventually gave permission for an excavation. They drilled into the concrete floor, but they found only water and sand. The psychic's vision was a fantasy. It was a cruel distraction that gave the family false hope and wasted valuable police time. Years turned into decades. The case never went cold. It stayed lodged in the public mind. For the Beaumont parents, life became an unbearable vigil. They stayed in the same house. They never changed the locks, they never changed their phone number. They lived in a state of suspended animation, always waiting for a knock on the door, for a phone call that would tell them their children were coming home. Nancy Beaumont once said in an interview that every time the phone rang, her heart would leap. Every time she saw children of a similar age, she would wonder. They were tortured by hope. They never held a memorial. To do so would be to admit their children were gone forever. Over the years, dozens of suspects have been looked at, but a few names stand out. One of the most compelling is a man named Arthur Stanley Brown. Brown was a career criminal with a history of violence and a disturbing interest in children. He looked remarkably like the police sketch. At the time of the abduction, he was working for a company that had an office in the Adelaide area. He was known to frequent Glenelg Beach. Years later, in 1998, he was charged with the murder of two other young girls, the sisters Judith and Susan Mackay, who disappeared in Queensland in 1970. The crimes were similar. The girls were taken from near a beach. Brown was never convicted for their murders because he developed Alzheimer's disease and was deemed unfit to stand trial. He died in 2002, taking any secrets he had to the grave. The circumstantial evidence linking him to the Beaumont case is strong. The resemblance, the method, the opportunity, but there's no physical proof. Another prominent suspect was Bevan Spencer von Einem. He was convicted in 1984 for the murder of a 15-year-old boy. He is suspected of being part of a group of men, sometimes called the Family, who were responsible for the abduction and murder of several young men in Adelaide during the 1970s and 80s. A witness in the von Einem case claimed that von Einem had boasted about taking the Beaumont children. He allegedly said he had taken them from the beach back to his house to perform experiments on them. He claimed he killed them and disposed of their bodies south of Adelaide. The police took this claim seriously. Von Einem fits the profile of a confident, manipulative predator, but again, there was no concrete evidence to charge him. The story could have been a prison yard boast. The investigation has never stopped. New leads are still followed up. In 2013 and again in 2018, police excavated a factory site in North Paringa, a suburb of Adelaide. A man came forward with a credible story. He said that as a boy, he had been paid by a man fitting the description of the main suspect to dig two large holes at the site, just days after the children disappeared. The timing was suspicious. The location made sense. The police used ground-penetrating radar. They found anomalies in the soil. Hopes were high, the media gathered, it felt like this could finally be the answer. But after days of digging, they found only animal bones and rubbish. Another dead end. Another wave of disappointment for the family and the country. So we were left with the same question. Why in plain sight? The predator was a student of human nature. He understood the rhythm of a place like a beach. It's a place of controlled chaos. Parents try to relax, but they also try to keep an eye on their kids. But you can't watch them every second. Kids run off to the water, to the kiosk, the playground. A man who inserts himself into that environment slowly, naturally, doesn't trip any alarms. He wasn't the creepy guy in a trench coat lurking in the shadows. He was the friendly suntanned man in swimming trunks. He probably had a friendly dog or a colorful beach ball. He was part of the scenery. He made himself invisible by being completely visible. Think about the psychology of it. He had to be incredibly confident, arrogant even. To operate with so many people around, you have to believe you won't get caught. Now, you have to believe you can control the situation completely. He could read the children perfectly. He saw Jane's sense of responsibility. He saw Arnna's playfulness. He saw Grant's childish trust. And he tailored his approach to each of them. He probably started with a simple game, throwing a ball, helping them build a sandcastle. He would have complimented them, asked them their names. He would have made them feel special. Children respond to that. They crave attention from adults. He gave it to them. The act of giving Jane the £1 note was a masterstroke of manipulation. It wasn't just a gift, it was a transaction. It created a bond, a secret. Now they were in on something together. Let's go buy a pie, it'll be our secret. It made Jane feel grown up. It gave the man power. He was now the provider, the fun adult who was breaking the rules a little bit. And when the time came to leave, he didn't say, "Get in my car." He probably said something like, "I know a place with kittens," or "I have some puppies at my house, do you want to see them?" Or "Let's go for a little drive, it'll be an adventure." For children who had been cooped up on a hot beach, an adventure with their new friend would have sounded exciting. The final walk away from the beach, the one the elderly woman witnessed, is the most haunting image. The children weren't in distress because they didn't know they were in danger. They were on their way to more fun. They trusted him. That trust is what led them away. That trust is why no one on that crowded beach intervened. There was nothing to intervene in. It just looked like a man taking his kids or his nieces and nephews home after a day at the beach. It looked perfectly normal. The disappearance of the Beaumont children drew a line in the sand of Australian history. Well, before them, there was a sense of safety, of community. After them, there was fear. Parents clutched their children's hands a little tighter. The rules changed. Don't talk to strangers. Never take candy from someone you don't know. The freedom that kids once had to explore their own world began to shrink. The Beaumont case was the death of a certain kind of Australian innocence. It taught a whole generation of parents and their children that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like a friendly man on a sunny beach. Jim Beaumont died in 2019. Nancy died in 2023. They died without ever knowing what happened to their children. They spent more than 50 years waiting. Their story is a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. It's not just about the loss of their children, but about the lifelong torment of not knowing. The not knowing is its own kind of prison. The police file on the Beaumont children remains open. It is the longest-running missing persons investigation in Australian history. The reward for information leading to a resolution stands at $1 million. But it's not about the money anymore, it's about finding an answer. It's about giving Jane, Arnna, and Grant a final resting place. It's about giving a name to the tall, blonde man who walked them away from the beach. The reason the case still grips us is because it feels so possible. It could have been anyone's children. It happened in the most ordinary of places, on the most ordinary of days. It reminds us how fragile safety is, how easily a normal day can be shattered, and it forces us to confront the nature of the person who did this. He wasn't a bungling opportunist. He was a patient, calculating predator. He planned his hunt. He chose his ground. He understood his prey. And he used the bright, cheerful, crowded atmosphere of a public beach as his personal hunting blind. He hid in plain sight. That is why they were taken. And that is why, all these years later, the mystery of the Beaumont children still chills us to the bone. It's a ghost story that happened in the sunshine.